Hello, my name is Tammy Rose, and welcome to Concord Days, sponsored by Transcendental Concord. And for today's guest, we have Zach from the Colonial Inn. Zach, could you please introduce yourself?
Absolutely. My name is Zach Trznadel. I'm the front office manager over at Concord's Colonial Inn.
Yay. And you have a quote that you brought today to start out the show.
I do. I was looking at some historical guests and I was like, this is interesting, but I wanted something that tied directly to the inn. And I think we have kind of a quiet legend in town of being known as a haunted property. So I thought it would be fun to pull a quote from a letter that I think kind of started the legend at our building. So this is back from the 60s by Judith Falens, who wrote a letter to the innkeeper at the time. And I'm just going to read a little excerpt of her letter about kind of what she saw. So I'll start here. And I like that she's very self-aware. She starts with, "The incident sounds very melodramatic. I was awakened in the middle of the night by a presence in the room and a feeling that some unknown being was in the midst. As I opened my eyes, I saw a grayish figure at the side of my bed, to the left about 4 feet away. It was not a distinct person, but a shadowy mass in the shape of a standing figure. It remained still for a moment, then slowly floated to the foot of the bed in front of the fireplace. After pausing a few seconds, the apparition slowly melted away. It was a terrifying experience. I was so frightened I could not scream. I was frozen to the spot. For the remainder of the night, I could not sleep. It was spent trying to conjure a logical explanation for the apparition. It was not a reflection of the moon, as all the curtains were completely closed. Upon relating the incident to my husband, he said the ghost was included in the price of the room." That's where I'll end that one.
Oh my God.
And a very true statement at that.
Well, yeah. So wait. So okay, let's jump right into the ghost story part, right?
Sure.
It's like this is where we can dispel a few myths and sort of talk about legends and stuff, right? Because like there's no guarantee that you're going to see a ghost. I, as a person who loves history, I feel like I have been searching for ghosts. I try to welcome them in. I do consider myself happily haunted by history, but I have never seen a ghost. I've never had anything like happen, and
well, Tammy, have you stayed in room 24?
I have not. And is that the room that everybody should ask for?
That's the missing link.
Yeah.
But it's funny. I think a lot of people who come and stay at the property are in a very experimental place where they're, testing the waters and maybe haven't had an experience. And it's funny, if you Google up the most haunted hotel in Massachusetts, we come up. And I think part of it is a part of it is that we were in Ghost Hunters. I think that probably feeds into it a little bit, right. But we get a lot of, bloggers and people who do their own video documentaries that stop in and want to see something for themselves.
Yeah. That's hysterical. So wait, and so my question is always, have you seen anything?
Well, it's so funny. I used to withhold telling the story because I was like, oh, this makes me sound crazy. But when you first start, it's like a rite of passage. We'll all kind of, be hanging out the front desk. The servers will come out, the maintenance people will come out, and we'll all kind of talk about the legend of the building. Because again, I think the inn we're famous for lots, but we're notorious for this. So we were all at the front desk telling ghost stories, and the maintenance man has a crazy ghost story about a little girl that was running through the hallways that he saw. And I was so jealous. I was like, I want to see something so bad. And they say that you shouldn't say that unless you really want an experience.
All right. Because somebody's listening.
Right. So not even, I don't know, probably 10 minutes later, everybody leaves. And I'm at the front desk and it's nighttime. And this is like probably my second week after starting at the inn. And I'm like, oh, like this is kind of creepy. And I felt like I was being watched. And I thought, maybe we're just talking about a lot of stories. Like this is just kind of freaking me out a little bit. Right. And that was not the case. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a full-fledged woman, like full figure of a woman, details, dress, hat. She had like salt and pepper hair. It was like very detailed, like very graphic. And then I saw her, similar to this quote, that she just like dissipated into thin air. And it was so weird because I couldn't explain it. And I remember being like, okay, gotta find a new job because I didn't want to deal with it. And I walked out the back door and I just said out loud, I said, listen, I don't want to see you. So please don't follow me home. Please don't do anything further. And since then I haven't seen an actual apparition.
Wow. Wait, and
Yeah.
so, yeah, so you said she was wearing a hat. Can you like date the period maybe that she was in, or
I'm
yeah.
not, I don't know if I'm like well versed enough in clothing to be able to give that, but it was one of those, like it was a kind of sideways top. I want to say this is probably 1900s. If you've seen some of the early black and white photos of the inn and of people kind of congregating outside of it, look
Right.
awful familiar to that era in time. She's
Cool.
wearing a full dress. It's weird because she did have like a grayish tint to her. I don't know. It's very hard to explain. Until you see it, you won't believe it.
Exactly.
Exactly.
So yeah, and so I'm always talking also about like time travel, right? And
Ooh.
especially, yeah, like, and especially in Concord, I feel like there is, and I think it has to do a lot of like how conscious Concord is of its history, that it doesn't want its main street and the downtown area to be, full of chain restaurants or, anything that looks too modern. Everything is sort of kept to the look that it had in the late 1800s. And so Concord visually is very, it feels like just as soon as you drive in, you sort of
Absolutely.
feel like, yeah, like you're
There's
already
a presentation that happens. And you know what? But what's so cool about that is I think the town puts a lot of pride in that. And I think the people who live here, the residents, the community as a whole really cares about keeping that aesthetic town-wide. I know that if we want to change the color of the inn, the whole town is deciding what color it's going to be. Like it's such an involved decision to keep Concord the aesthetic that it is. And I think that's awesome. I do.
Exactly. Because it really, so I was gonna say like one of the place, and like there are a lot of author houses that you can visit, and even in Walden, right? Like they have the recreation of the cabin. So like it feels like there are lots of ways that you can step into another time, right?
Yeah.
And I feel like definitely walking into the Colonial Inn, especially in the middle of winter when you guys have the fires going in all the fireplaces, like you walk in, you feel the old wood boards, and you can tell that not only is it an older building, but it just feels like the history is around you,
Yeah.
and like even like apart from ghosts, apart from like the other world that we can't necessarily describe, just like the physical world around you already feels different, right?
Absolutely. When I describe it to people, I describe it as it's like when you walk into a really old church and it kind of feels like an experience and you can just kind of feel like a change in the air. That's how I can compare it. And I think it really comes from the people who have visited the inn. There's a lot of people who come to the property and are just looking for ghosts and they stay in the ghost room, but they leave being like, wow, the history here was so amazing. I didn't see, any sightings of something paranormal, but I learned that the stuff that was really present here was so much cooler. And I think that is my goal when I bring in, any kind of guest that is looking for something that I can't guarantee. Is like, I can't guarantee you're going to see XYZ, but I can guarantee you that this hotel has amazing history that you need to fully indulge in. You know what I mean? That's my goal.
Exactly. Yeah. So can we kind of go through like a timeline of the hotel's history? Because I know that there's sort of like there are different buildings and then there are different things that have happened every so often that it's hard for me to even keep track. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I have paper here to reference as well. I have like a good old bullet pointed outline and timeline really of what's happened. I think there's always going to be some confusion when it comes to history, and things are always changing. This is something that I'm learning the more I'm around people who research history and are historians, is that history is always changing as we learn more. So I try to always keep that in mind when I am getting into the history, because who knows. But
and I always like to point out, like, especially in Concord, there's a huge difference between like actual documented things that we can find and then the legend that has sprung up about something just because it's a good story. And it's
absolutely.
like I always like to have both of them, because like I'm a playwright. I love a good narrative, but I also like to fact check and like to find out what we actually know about. And then also, so I was going to say part of the history of the Colonial Inn is that it sort of started as one building and like other buildings have been added to it. And, then there was a modern part that was put on, I guess, in the 60s and whatever. So let's go to your paper and start from there. Start from what you have. Yeah.
So we'll start with, how the buildings were constructed. So we're moving from east to west when it comes to the construction of the buildings. So the original portion, while on paper, we're able to document that 1716, like we can hands down say that that's when the building, was erected and was standing. There are, accounts that might point to it could have been from the late 1600s. So it could be even older than we would think. I don't know. But
and when you say the east part of the building, is that like the main door that people walk in?
No. So the eastern portion would be where the Thoreau room is. If you've ever used one of our function rooms, it would be home to what now presently holds our parlor or our lobby area, as well as kind of the entryway to Merchant's Row, which is that main dining room out back.
Right. And you can tell that you're in the Thoreau room because there's a giant bust of Thoreau inside. And there's a cute little fireplace, I think. Yes. And it's one of this, I've definitely had lunch in there a bunch of times.
It's my favorite room, I think, out of all of them. And partially the color scheme is really good in that room. They really had that on point. The wallpaper's great. But that room really is the oldest part of the hotel. And that's where the greatest ties to history lie, is within that section of the hotel. The east end of the property is fabulous with what it's, been home to. It, has roots in Thoreau's family. It has roots in Dr. Timothy Minot, who, is legendarily haunting the inn. That's where all the story starts. So I think the east section of the property, when you stay in those rooms, you can feel a difference. And part of it is in the architecture. We have a gentleman who, we do have two sister properties, has been going from property to property and architecturally breaking down, what time frame was this from exactly, based on things like the height of the windows, based on things like how wide the floor planks are. And that is what's so interesting to me, is the provable evidence that you can experience in your room. If you want to investigate on your own the history of the building, you can do it just by staying in your room. I think that's really cool.
Yeah.
Anyways, onto the history.
Yeah.
So the western or the eastern section first was in the Minot family, or I think it's Dr. Minot more formally, but we all kind of refer to him as Minot. So the eastern section is what he held home to. Captain James ended up selling that to his son, Timothy, who is the legendary doctor. I think there is the biggest misconception would be what a doctor was back then.
Right.
What was a doctor doing? Was a doctor just kind of watching over and caring for someone? What did medication look like? What did surgery look like? But the legend says that Dr. Timothy Minot, took care of the wounded soldiers that were injured down at the battle at North Bridge, which is just 3/4 of a mile down the road. So logistically, it makes sense. The eastern portion of the building was also attached to the center portion of the building where our front desk and main entrance now lie. But at that time, it was not much more than a shed with a dirt floor. But that was where, ammunitions were stored. That's where we did hide some of the supplies that were going to be used in these battles. So it's not crazy to say that maybe he was caring for wounded soldiers in there. This is that fact checking that you and I love doing.
Right.
So it makes sense. I think that is really true. We know that Dr. Minot lived in that section of the property.
Yeah, and again, like, when you're talking about like what is a doctor, right? Like, is this sort of like he's the town barber and deals with all sorts of like random stuff?
Yes.
And he doesn't have a degree. Like, they didn't have degrees back then necessarily. There was no AMA,
Well, do you know anything about what would really constitute a doctor back then? Like, how would you be given the title of doctor?
So that is an excellent question, because there's also another division between, and this sort of deals with like witchcraft and stuff, like women who, like people who are trying to create medicines, right? So for instance, my family grew up in the Azores and a bunch of islands, and my grandmother knew exactly what kind of tea to drink for whatever kind of ailment that you have. And there's usually a few like elder people in the community who, if you're feeling kind of ill, like this is what you can ask them for. And maybe they collect herbs and things like that.
Okay. Yeah.
So I'm also, I've also heard that there was a big crossover between like the people who are just gonna like shave your beard and deal with blades, and hey, they have the equipment. So maybe they're going to, start performing surgery. And
really, are you serious?
Yeah, like that. Yeah. And so, and there's a big thing about like how barbershop, like the striped pole that they have, like that goes back into medicine as well. And anyway, so yeah, so there's that piece as well. Yeah, so I'm not exactly sure of, what his credentials were,
Right.
but again, like in a town where, you're really just settling in. Everybody had just, the town of Concord was settled by, white people in 1635, right? So people had still just been building houses, things
Right.
were, so sort of everybody tried to do everything or tried to figure out how their talents were. And this is the guy who is maybe not afraid of blood, right? And he's going to be a little bit braver. And if there's a bullet in you, maybe he's going to be the one that you ask to.
Well, I was going to say, I think that would play a huge piece in it. While now we can see him referred to as doctor, that doesn't mean he was at the time. Maybe at the time, when there's a bunch of people getting injured down the road and maybe making their way into the center of town, are you going to turn them away, or are you going to do your best to make it work? And that could have been an honorary title given. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I know that medicine was not like it was now. So he was not like a surgeon with like a big, what is it called that goes on the forehead? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Oh, right. Yeah. So like the stereotypical like doctor costume,
yes,
like the dentist thing, and it's a reflector. So it's supposed to reflect the light into like, if it's a dentist, like into your mouth or into the wound or whatever. It like instead of having a headlight, like that's what the old doctors would use.
Right. Well, I've had a guest come up to me once and be like, I saw the doctor, they had one of those reflectors on the head. And I didn't have it in my heart to be like, I don't think that was around back then. I just don't think it was there. And that just goes to show how, legends can really kind of direct your mind in a certain direction for what you're going to see.
Yeah. But there's a piece of me that's kind of like, as the playwright, I'm always like, hey, if you get called doctor enough, you're going to appear in as many kind of costumes as people would recognize you. It's like, hello, I'm the doctor.
He's just trying to have his big moment right now. I can't fault him for that at all.
Exactly. Yeah. So wait, so there is there actual documentation that when the battle happened, like the people who were hurt, the soldiers the people who were fighting, the farmers, essentially, the Minutemen, were taken to that place where the front desk is? And like sort of that shed area?
I think so. I know we have documentation on the ammunitions being hidden in that center portion. On the eastern portion of the building where his residence was, there's documentation that he did care for people, but there's not documentation that on the large day of the battle on, April 19th, there's no documentation on that. There is documentation, I think, via journal entry that talks about how he was hiding in the woods. So I don't think he was there on the day of the battle.
Oh, wait. So he was
a bombshell
because he didn't want to fight?
I think he could have been scared. I know he had a family. Maybe he was trying to hide his family away and take care of them. I don't know. And that's the funny thing, is that I think that's where a lot of these stories come from, is that we can't answer really anything at all.
Right.
At all. So I don't know. But I don't think he was here on the day of the actual battle. No.
Okay. Thank you for clearing that up. Because so for anybody who has not been to Concord or Lexington on April 19th, or like, what is it, the third Monday in April, right? Which is, we call Patriots Day in Massachusetts. The whole town celebrates it. It's like the town, it's bigger than the town's birthday. It's bigger than the town's like just the idea of an anniversary. It's like, this is celebrating the battle at the Old North Bridge, where everybody, like, they're reenactors and there's a parade and they're, like, people. I was going to say, my father woke me up when I was a kid and he's like, oh my God, we have to go to the reenactment. And I was like, what are you talking about? We to like Lexington, I think it was Lexington Green, and we ended up in Concord, but it was like the crack of dawn, and he put me on his shoulders, and all I remember is seeing like the top of muskets inside this crowd, and like there was smoke. So like there is an annual reenactment, and like I think COVID had stopped it, but it's getting back up.
I think it'll definitely be happening next year. It's so funny. I think that your memory is so similar to mine, because I remember it just like that growing up. It's such a another, I don't know, rite of passage for everybody who lives in this area. It's something that everyone experiences and you don't always remember. And as a kid, you're like, okay, I can't see anything. I hear some loud noises. There's a lot of people. Great. And it's not till you get older that you just think about like all the people who come out and still, you know, honor such a special day in like America's history. Like the passion behind these people who come in and reenact is, oh, it's so fabulous. I had a guest who is related to a very famous actor, but he's actually a reenactor. And every year he does Patriots Day, and he just dropped off portraits of himself during the actual like live battles that they do every year. And he left them with me. And it's just a really cool keepsake because for him, that's a tradition he did every year. It's like a brotherhood to him that he gets to work with these people every year. And I don't know. I think it's so special. I really do.
Yeah, exactly. And then, and to even be a witness to that as well. And even if you talked, and so I've also talked to some of the reenactors where like, they're not just a generic person. They have researched somebody who is on the battlefield and they're playing a very specific character.
Yes.
And sometimes they have to change according to like what age they are, and maybe they'll grow out of a character one year and into another one the next year or whatever. But it's very
funny. It's not just fun and games to them. This really is like a historical passion to them, and they do feel like they're honoring and representing someone. I think that's so cool. I think it's so cool. And I think Concord brings out the passion in a lot of people.
Exactly.
I think it embraces it and supports it. I love it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I want to make note that it's April 19th, 1775, right? Whereas the rest of America thinks of, 1776 is the Revolutionary War. Yeah. Well, there was a lot of fighting that went on between the first shot and then like the Declaration of Independence, right? Like that was a long
Didn't happen in a day. It didn't happen in a day.
Exactly.
Not by any means. It's funny. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with the legend of Amy White. I would imagine you are. Amy White? No. Really?
Tell.
Okay, it's so funny because in school, I think this is how they got us as kids to be really excited about, you know, these battles with like these grisly stories. So Amy White, the legend says that there was a wounded British soldier who was like really just like not doing good, didn't think he was going to make it, who knows. And Amy White supposedly hacked him with an axe, brutally. And so there's kind of two POVs of the story. You know, British soldiers are like, oh, he did it, you know, to just hurt him, and it was brutal and it was disgusting. And then, you know, more so on the American side, we're like, you know, it was a act of mercy. This man was, you know, really suffering, and Amy was just trying to end it real quick. Yeah. But funnily enough, he ended up actually owning some property at the inn. And so that was a really cool connection for me. When I started working, I was like, I've heard about you, and it hasn't been all great things, but he owned the property for a time. He actually ended up purchasing it from the Minot family, which I thought was really cool. I just had to throw that in there.
Yeah, no, wait. So you're saying the British soldier who was attacked by an axe, and did he survive this axe attack?
I mean, there's a couple, again, it's very legendary. So there's a couple different accounts of it, but it seems like some Americans came together after and tried to care for him, but he did not make it. They tried to give him a more peaceful way of exiting. Some say that he just died once he was hit with the axe. It's so legendary in that way.
Exactly. So but he owned the part of the Colonial Inn like before, prior to that. Well, and this is a piece that Concord doesn't always talk about, the fact that there were lots of people then who were actually loyal to the crown living in Concord. So, you know, we try to tell,
really? So, I didn't know that.
Yes. And well, this is the thing. And if you talk to, I think so, Shane Clark, I think, is one of the reenactors who knows a lot of history.
Yep.
And so he's talking about some of the people who were like, you know, before this happened, it was the law that you had to obey the British and you had to pay your taxes, and, you know, before the Tea Party and all that. Right. So there were plenty of people who were like, why are you guys rebelling? Like, what is going on? Why can't you just like obey the rules? So a lot of them actually, I think, ended up moving out of town. And like one of them that Shane told me, he like ended up moving to Maine, you know, to just kind of like Yeah. So that's, and I again, like, I don't know much about it, but I do know that it's like, not everybody in town was was of the opinion that we should have a whole new country, because why? Like that's
Right.
a lot of
Right.
work, you know?
Yeah, a lot of work. And I'm sure they're already working overtime to just keep the town running at that point.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. Like just chopping wood is like a full-time job. Trying to do laundry and
No,
just
you're right.
get food on the table. So why are you even, talking about all this politics and, yeah. So what if the British soldiers are here? They're here to protect us from
Right.
Native
Well, it's
Americans
probably
or
the
bears.
fear of what happens. I mean, if you get exiled by this main country that really has the resources that you probably need when the country's starting off, I don't know if I would feel comfortable either just like being like, okay, we're done with them. Like, we've got this. I think as a town, they were figuring things out. And so that would make sense to me. But I guess I've never thought about it.
Yeah, exactly. So there are, and I feel like, so, and of the reenactors, I actually did a Concord Days last year with Paul O'Shaughnessy, I think, and he portrays one of the British soldiers.
Okay.
And I think he got into that because like nobody wanted to be a British soldier,
Right.
so he was like, all right,
Right.
there's a role open. But yeah, so there's that whole piece. And before we leave the British soldier that you're talking about, and I'm not sure if it's the same person, but there's a tiny little thing across from the Colonial Inn, across the street, and it almost looks like a little headstone or something. There's a little stone that has a plaque on it.
Yes.
And apparently that's where one of the British soldiers who had been injured, like he was able to crawl that far into town, which is 3/4 of a mile, as you said.
Yes, I have heard that story. Based off of fact checking with historians, I don't know if we're ever going to be able to make the connection, but it is a fun story. It is a fun story. It'd be very interesting to see if that really is the connection. A tragic story, but I don't know. I think it's interesting. It's interesting how there was even gossip back then, even about such brutal acts. Like the town really would talk, and it definitely sounds a lot more lovely to think about. Maybe we all did come together and let him go out peacefully, but this was, I'm sure, a very intense time. So I don't know who we can fault in this scenario.
Exactly. And kind of because we don't know, it's sort of like, let's just leave it. We can leave it up in the air. It's like, was this the zombie apocalypse for them? Right. Or was this just like, hey, here's a guy suffering and, he's human too. So.
Right. Yeah. It's super interesting. So Amy White then was the connection to John Thoreau. So interesting, right? Again, like it's just so interesting that this man that had a legend was the connection between two really large legends in town.
Right.
So he sold the East House to John Thoreau, and then
who is Henry's father, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. So at that point, it became, from what I understand, John Thoreau owned or worked rather at the building next door that used to be a general store.
Right.
That is what I understand from the story. That's now being turned into an art gallery, which is fabulous. But he used to, work at that general store. Later in life, what has become the story or the legend that we, tell at the inn is that Henry David Thoreau's aunts were the big entertainers of the home. And so they say that, these, because it's not, even though I had a sighting of a woman in a dress in that parlor, that's not the first time that a woman or multiple women have been sighted in that parlor. So the legend stands that, that was the entertainment room at the time. And that is where Henry David Thoreau's aunts did set up. And they were the big entertainers of the house. They were the life of the party. Henry David Thoreau was known to come and visit his family there because they did live there. So we're never going to know to what degree he might have really been there. Did he stay the night ever? Who knows? But there definitely are pretty strong family ties in that building by record.
Yeah, which I love. And so one of the story that I know about Henry's aunt, and it's Aunt Mariah, right? It's spelled Maria, but it's pronounced Mariah. When he was arrested and put into jail, right? And there's a tiny little marker in Monument Square about that as well. As soon as his aunt heard about that, she's the one who paid his fine.
Oh, really?
And she paid it like that day. And poor Sam Staples had like just come home, and he like, he took off his shoes and his socks, and he was like warming his feet by the fire. And he's like, oh man, like I should go over there and let Henry out, but I'm just too tired. So they let him stay there overnight. And if that didn't happen, then civil disobedience would have never happened.
No way.
Yeah. So, and so here's another piece. If you're in Monument Square, which I always like to refer to as like this giant like exclamation mark. Right? and I feel like the Colonial Inn is sort of at the top of it. And because it's essentially two rotaries, right? And there's a big angular rotary, and then there's another round rotary. Right. So closer to that round rotary, there is a section of land that's sort of just a bunch of monuments, right? And it's a corner, and there's a sign that says like, this is Jethro's tree, and supposedly that's where they handed over the town, or they got it from the Native Americans. I don't know that I believe that story. Other historians said, yeah, it's not, whatever. But there are a bunch of like World War II monuments in that immediate area. And for years, for like 150 years, I think, there was actually a hotel there, and that was called the Middlesex Hotel.
Yes.
And one of the reasons I love it so much is that in it, there were a bunch of fires, and it was there when Henry David Thoreau was there. And I think for like the last 10 years that it was up, like 1890 to like 1900, it was empty. So it must have like been like this giant ghost in the middle of town, and people must have told like creepy stories just about that. And
that's very interesting.
Yeah. And apparently like it was a giant hotel. And so when people came through Concord with carriages, people would use it. But as soon as the railroad was up, like everybody like went right through town, and suddenly that hotel like went out of business. So the whole reason I'm setting this up is that if you want to find the jail cell where Henry David Thoreau is, you have to go almost like close to the parking lot that's in the back of that green space to find this tiny little monument. And that's where that jail actually, because it was behind the Middlesex Hotel.
What's so interesting about that, now that you're like kind of saying that and putting the years out there. So if you're saying that like, you're saying late 1890 to like 1900, and that's when it was vacant before it went gone. Yeah. I always wondered, knowing that there was a hotel there, why the Colonial lasted and, their hotel did not. Right. And the Colonial Inn operated as solely a boarding house from like 1860 to 1901. Right. When it's so funny, when we were in the library going through the archives, which are fabulous. I'd recommend anybody who comes to Concord, go to the Concord Public Library and check out these archives. It's so spectacular, and some amazing documentation. It's like a custom museum in my, opinion. No. But there was a huge dedication book, because the Colonial Inn used to be known as Thoreau House. Like that was the name of it when it was a boarding home. So in 1901, it was ended up, being switched over to the Colonial Inn. But I wonder if it was turned into a larger hotel because they lost the only other hotel that was in town, rather than the boarding home that was situated more so for longer term living.
Right. And then also, if you're at a boarding house, like you're also getting your meals, like that's part of the whole package, right? Yeah. So having a hotel and like I don't know the intricacies about like, what amenities you get or you don't get back then, but like, yeah, I think that's a huge piece of and like it's funny that they called it the Colonial Inn and not the Thoreau Inn, or like using
I don't know what inspired the switch, but something did definitely inspire the switch, because I've seen the book and I was like, I wonder why. Because I think the Thoreau House would have done very well as well. I think that would be a fabulous name. Yes. The amount of people who come to visit us just to go to Walden Pond, I mean, it's pretty iconic. It's really, really cool.
And again, like the Colonial Inn is like, as you said, like 3/4 of a mile away from the Old North Bridge and the Old Manse and Robin's house, right? So like that's one end of town. Yeah. And then I think Walden is maybe 2 miles away. Like it's definitely walkable if you want to cross Route 2, which exactly. You can, like you can, kind of don't want to, but yeah.
But I mean, it's only also like 1/4 of a mile from Sleepy Hollow, which is a very iconic cemetery. I mean, It's not the Sleepy Hollow from the story. That's the number one correction I always have to tell guests, is that it's not Washington Irving's Sleepy Hollow Cemetery, but it's also just a beautiful cemetery. The graves that are there, the history that is there is so fabulous. I mean, I always recommend, if you can find a historian or a tour that'll really tell you about all the amazing people buried there, do it, because it is home to some really influential people.
Exactly. And like, so the famous part is Author's Ridge. Correct. And like Thoreau, Emerson, Hawthorne, Louisa May Alcott, like all the big ones are up there. But also, if you wander around, and this is why you should get a tour from somebody who actually knows, you can see like Elizabeth Palmer Peabody, right? And you can see like literally the first woman who got a driver's license in America is buried there. And and you can also see where Henry was originally buried. Just by the entrance, and you get a lot more, and you can see I'm going to say it wrong. I keep wanting to call it the Melville Memorial, but I think it's not. The Melvin Memorial. I'm
not familiar with that. What is that?
Yeah, so it's a beautiful marble sculpture that they just cleaned within the past few years, and it was created by the gentleman who created the Lincoln Memorial. Daniel Chester French. And he had created that for a set of brothers who had died in World War I. So no, Civil War. and I would say, if you really want a tour of this, you should call Richard Smith from the Concord Tour Company, and he's the one who knows all about the Civil War history. He would laugh at me for getting that wrong. But again, like, and I do have a tour guide license. I'm taking Victor class, but I'm terrible with names, terrible with dates, terrible with all of it. But I love hearing the stories, and I love sharing the stories. So
yes, there's also just so much in this town. I applaud the tour guides for being able to remember how much history is packed into this town. It really is fabulous. Exactly. And something to touch upon too, especially for people who are coming to visit, because they have a love for Louisa May Alcott, or because they have a love for Henry. It's really cool going up to the graves and seeing the little trinkets people leave as like leaving a piece of themselves at the, I don't know. I think it's so cool. I don't know, have you ever left anything there before?
Oh, yes, of course.
Yeah. What have you left?
Okay, so one of the typical things that gets left at Henry and Louisa's graves are pencils, right? Yeah. Henry especially, because he had a pencil factory, and he had created this whole like different recipe of lead and whatever. So I've definitely left notes. I've left drawings. And this is probably when I was more a teenager. And like things and leaves, so, stones, like it's the Jewish tradition to sort of leave a rock or something.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So, and also just for all of you out there who are environmentalists who are like, oh, you shouldn't leave any plastic trinkets or blah, blah, blah. I heard of one, very overly zealous Thoreauvian who says every time he goes to Sleepy Hollow, he actually removes all of this stuff because he gets offended by it and he just throws it into the trash. I would say, like, do not do that. The park people are the ones who are responsible for collecting everything. Right. And I don't know if they are saving it somewhere or however they curate it or whatever. It feels like every time I go, there's always stuff there.
Always. I've never gone there to see an empty grave ever.
Exactly. And it's very sweet. Have you ever left anything there?
I haven't. It's funny. So I was working here probably for 6 months before I went to Sleepy Hollow. And I just decided that one day I was going to go into Concord and be a tourist and do everything, like knock everything off of it. I went to the North Bridge. I discovered that fabulous garden built into a hill that overlooks the North Bridge that I think some people are so busy just trying to get to the bridge, they skip over the beautiful grounds that are overlooking it. Right. But I did one day, I went over to Sleepy Hollow and I went to Author's Ridge. I have to say, probably one of the most beautiful cemeteries I've ever seen. There's something really special about it. I didn't leave anything because I didn't feel like I had the connection that I feel like some of these people really do with these authors, but it was like really cool. I think when I was leaving, someone was just like sticking a pencil into the ground and I was like, that's so cool. Cause that's probably such a moment for her. Right. Some people at the hotel, they'll ask for items. Like a guest just asked 2 weeks ago to leave a grapefruit because it was like a special symbol to her that she wanted to leave on Louisa May Alcott's grave. And I know she took a grapefruit from her kitchen. I got it for her and she left it on the stone. And I don't know, like, I think that's so special. I think that's really, really cool.
Yeah. And so I think there's so let's talk about the people who come to the Colonial Inn.
Yeah.
Because I feel like there are definitely people who are pilgrims, right? And I feel like part of the reason I'm doing like this YouTube series, and I have a Facebook group, and I do a podcast where I'm reading Walden, I feel like I always want to share Concord with people who are not close by, right? Like I grew up 15 minutes away in Waltham, but there are plenty of people who maybe they're only going to visit, you know, Concord once in their lives. And I call those people pilgrims who are already, they're already revved up. They're already like so excited to see absolutely everything. But they're also like, before we got on, you were saying like, there's just so many people who are highly educated and like people who are highly accomplished who just come through the inn, right?
Yeah, there's really influential guests that are, you know, drawn to us. I think, you know, something that's so cool and something that I grew up also about 20 minutes from the property, and I grew up in Westford, Massachusetts. So to me, Concord was like a neighboring town that, you know, they did something big once a year and that's all I knew of it. Right. But to see international visitors come, this is what's the most exciting for me, is when I see people come and take like a 19-hour flight, not even to go just to Boston, but to come to Concord because this is where America's history started. Right. That is so cool to me, that people are this passionate and this excited about something. They come into the hotel, everything is amazing to them. They want pictures of everything. You know, that kind of, I hate to say it, like clientele, but those guests are the ones that, you know, find so much beauty and so much joy in the property. They just want to learn. And so sending those people to other people in town who are also passionate about the town to tell their stories of what growing up like was in Concord, or some of the legends or lore that take place in Concord. That's what I love the most. I think what's special about Concord is its residents as well. The residents here in Concord care about this town so much, and they're usually willing to share, you know, the history and their stories of the town with the people that come to visit. Influentially speaking, I can never share for the sake of privacy, but I was shocked when I started working here within 6 months, the amount of people that I like watched in movies or watched in television that came and stayed at the property. And I was like, here? Really? You're like, you're not going to like Boston? Like you don't care about being in a Four Seasons? Like you're cool coming to this historic property it's a 300-year-old building. It's never going to be the Omni Parker House, which is another beautiful historic hotel, but it's never going to be that. Right. But people come because they want to be a part of the history. So they usually are really highly educated. It's people who are usually really passionate about the history as well and want to pass it on to their kids. That's what I usually see, is really, you know, well-educated, influential people come with their families, and maybe they're here doing business in Boston, but they want their family to learn the history of our country and appreciate it.
Exactly. And so wait, so I also wanted to put in a tip for some of my friends, because like there are plenty of people who are well educated, but they're academics or they're students or whatever, who are dying to stay at the Colonial Inn, or maybe I shouldn't say dying, who are eager to stay at the Colonial Inn, but maybe it's a little either like out of their price range, or there are moments when I know it gets filled up. So I would like, let's talk just about like general recommendations if you're going to come and stay. Cause I would say like,
I would recommend, so it depends what kind of trip you're coming on. There are some people who come to Concord and they are huge fans of the authors and are also writers themselves and want a place to kind of retreat, write, reflect. I, recommend those kinds of guests come from January to March. It's going to be our lowest rates of the year, like by a long shot. You can stay in the historic inn because occupancy level is sitting at like maybe 20, 25%. You are feeling like this is your house. You know what I mean? You're going to get such a personalized experience by coming during those times. So that's what I would recommend. Though, Concord has a lot of outdoor activities that are hard to see if there's snow on the ground. So I think you have to kind of weigh that back and forth and see what works for you. Yeah. But for a really like special personalized experience where like you can really just enjoy the building, and I enjoy it most at its silence, is like January, February, March, like you can just hear every creak in the building. And it just, I don't know. I know it sounds so corny, but it's so special to me. I love it. I love it.
And frankly, like I would also recommend like going to Walden, in the off season too, like from January to March, like, and definitely you should take those crampons and stuff on the bottom of your shoe because it does get icy. But walking around Walden Pond when the pond is frozen over, or there's just a light bit of snow, or even just when it's cold and like nobody's there, it feels like you have the pond to yourself, and it's amazing.
Yeah, there's something, I don't know, there's something really special about coming to this town in the winter, because you really do get to just have your own experience and really just like do what you want. When it's touristy time, you're so busy building an itinerary and I have to be here at this time. There's a chance of something selling out here. There's something special when you can go to the Concord Museum. There's very little people there and you can just actually learn from the representatives there who have the time now to tell like specialized and personalized stories. I love that.
Right. Me too. Me too. And so I was going to say, so the times that are hardest to get, I would say like are around April 19th. The week of Thoreau's birthday, like the week before that, because usually that is the annual gathering of the Thoreau Society. And I think like summer in general, and I feel like it goes all the way up until maybe leaf peeping season and maybe Thanksgiving, and even Christmas might get a little much.
I think so. Summer, believe it or not, is not as insane as you'd think. The month of June is super busy. And I think because of some of the events that do happen, June is really busy for us. I'd say August is actually one of our quieter months for the year. September and October are next level. That is the most intense time to come to the town of Concord. It's also the most beautiful time. So that's why it's so competitive. But it's definitely our busiest. The holiday weeks get super busy, 100%. Thanksgiving week is just about sold out. Christmas week is on the verge. But the weeks before and after are great times to come visit, where the rates are also, at a more affordable, range.
Yeah. And also I would recommend, like, if you also want to come to Concord, like you can just spend one night at the Colonial Inn, right? And try to spend the rest of the time, find a Airbnb or whatever, but like, and get the experience. Or if you can't do that, even just go to the restaurants and just go for brunch or dinner or whatever. Cause like, I feel like just going inside. And I also feel like the Colonial Inn is so welcoming and accessible that, like it's inviting. It wants you to come in and visit it.
That's something that the owner of our company takes really seriously. There are some places you'll go to where they're like no public restrooms. And that was like one immediate thing where he was like, we always want to offer that to our community. And that's a part of inviting people into the building so that maybe they're just coming for the bathroom, but they're going to walk out and see, oh my, like, what is this register book that's wide open and has FDR's signature? Like they're going to pick up on things like that. And I think that is the goal of having an inviting place. If you don't stay with us, that's okay. But I do think the Colonial Inn is a really monumental space in Concord that everyone should experience during their visit.
Yes, absolutely. And I also want to point out on Thursday nights, there's a little bar in the back, and John Fitzsimmons usually performs there. Maybe not during COVID, but
Yes. We're hoping he comes back soon. I think we're finally getting to a place, I think, in the country as well, where staffing is starting to be a little bit more manageable. And, now that we're starting to get there and the winter months are coming and outdoor seating isn't a demand like it once was, I think we'll be able to start introducing that soon, which will be special, because if you want to see Concord residents, that is the night to come. That is just the most amazing local crowd of people who are super inviting, by the way. It's just really fun.
Yeah, exactly. And just so you know, when I like in the like I guess late 90s, they also had a concert series in the basement.
What?
I know, right? So so there was a folk music radio station in West Concord. Okay. And the people who worked there actually ran Bob Weiser ran a folk music series in the basement. And I think you use it as a banquet room or something now.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I definitely helped on all those concerts, and it's one of those things where, yeah. So
that's something I really like too, is the amount of people who come back to the property and are like, I worked here, or this was like, there was a year that I worked here when I lived in town and it had some of the best memories of my life. Like, that's another thing that just makes it such a staple is, the role it's played in so many people's lives. Our Thanksgiving dinner is such, like, that's an annual tradition, not just for us as a property, but for families. You know what I mean? Like, that really is a spot that some people have their best memories of the year. You know, the holidays are so important and so special. And for me, working at a property that is home to people's like best memories is what makes it worth it. Like, that's what I like. I love hearing stories like that.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. So, and I also wanted to point out that you're not actually speaking from the inn, but you're speaking from Rebecca's cottage, right? Which is like sort of satellite property. So if somebody's like, oh my God, I want to move into the inn and I want a bookcase like that over your shoulder, like it's.
We'll see what we can do, but I can't promise. It won't be this bookshelf. Certainly not.
Exactly. All right. So are there any last words that you have or pieces of advice or, you know, anything else that you'd like to share before we end?
My biggest piece of advice is for anyone who's coming to visit Concord, call the inn and just like be honest about what you're looking for. If you're coming and you're like, I'm a huge Henry David Thoreau fan. I am coming for the first time. I want to visit. What should I do? You know, our desk agents, it's really important for me and for them to be able to give somebody a really unique experience. So we can put you in the part of the hotel that was home to him so you can really get that full experience. We can connect you with people in town who are passionate about his stories and want to tell you about them and walk you around town themselves. So I think being honest about why you're visiting the town and what you're passionate about is going to give you the best stay. So if there's anybody who has had like a visit in Concord in mind and needs help planning it, like just call anyone. Everyone's so happy to help here. I really mean that.
Yes, I totally agree. Well, thank you very much. This has been a really fabulous time. If anybody has any more questions, go to transcendentalconcord.com, where we have links to our Facebook group and other episodes in the series of Concord Days, and also links to the podcast about Walden. So thanks, Zach. And
thank you, Tammy. I had a blast. I learned a little too. It was great. I loved it.
We should talk more. Absolutely. All right, everyone. So thank you very much. Thanks for watching, and we will see you next time on Concord Days.